नाज़रीन अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मैं इस वक्त बेथ इज़राइल हॉस्पिटल न्यू यॉर्क में हूँ और मेरे साथ हैं डॉक्टर अस्मा सादिक। अस्सलाम वालेकुम डॉक्टर साहब।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
आज आपने ये ऑटिज़म पे एक बहुत बड़ी कॉन्फ्रेंस मुनक्कद की। ये पहली दफ़ा थी?
ये ऑटिज़म पे तो पहली थी, लेकिन मैंने 2-3 पहले भी कॉन्फ्रेंसेस की हैं ताकि बच्चों का इलाज सही हो और हमें तालीम के लिए और समझने के लिए।
सही है। और आप डायरेक्टर हैं पीडियाट्रिक्स डेवलपमेंट में डिवीज़न है, डेवलपमेंटल बिहेवियरल पीडियाट्रिक्स का, बट दिस इज़ इन द डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ पीडियाट्रिक्स। ठीक है। तो आप पेरेंट्स को आज हमारे टीवी के ज़रिए कोई एडवाइस करना चाहती हैं कि?
मैंने कहा बहुत उम्मीद है और बहुत रिसर्च हो रही है और माँ बाप और पेरेंट्स उनकी बड़ी हिम्मत है एंड दे आर पुशिंग दिस मूवमेंट। बल्कि मैं बताना चाहती हूँ कि इस दफ़ा मैं अभी कराची से आई हूँ, कपल मंथ्स 2 महीने हुए, एंड डाउ मेडिकल कॉलेज जहाँ से मैंने अपना मेडिकल डिग्री मिली, वहाँ पर एक ऑटिज़म यूनिट बनाया गया है, एक चाइल्ड डेवलपमेंट सेंटर के साथ, और जिसने शुरू किया था वो एक माँ है। तो उसने अपने बच्चे के इलाज के लिए और बहुत सी चीज़ें उर्दू में ट्रांसलेट कराई, डॉक्टर्स के साथ कोलैबोरेशन की, एंड वी इंशाल्लाह विल बी डूइंग मोर। मैं अपना डॉक्टर्स की कॉन्फ्रेंस भी है अगले फ्राइडे, एंड आई एम आल्सो स्पीकिंग अगेन ऑन ऑटिज़म, एंड आई थिंक वी नीड टू लुक एट ये बीमारियां जो सब फैल रही हैं, एज़मा की, डायबिटीज़ की, ADHD जो कहते हैं, और हमें ग़िज़ा पे फोकस करना चाहिए और माहौल पे। और मैंने जो सीखा है वो पुरानी हिकमत से भी, एक तरह से हर बीमारी पेट से, एंड वी आर फाइंडिंग ग्लूटेन, दूध की सेंसिटिविटी, वीट पे, देयर सर्टेन थियरीज ऑन द बैक्टीरिया and also on the environment. So there's very interesting research coming out. There are small studies, but the best study is when a parent also works with their child. और अगर तुम किसी चीज़ करने से फ़ायदा हो रहा होता है, you must report it. And because doctors then research it. वहीं से तो इल्म आता है ना। तो it's दुनिया में एक वक्त आया हुआ है बहुत लेवल्स पर, और हमारे बच्चे जो हैं वो सबसे मासूम हैं और सबसे पहले बीमार होते हैं। और आई थिंक बहुत फ़िक्र की बात है कि द स्टेटिस्टिक्स आर 1 in 88 of our children are being diagnosed now with an autism spectrum disorder, and in certain areas it's 1 in 49. So what is the reason for this increase? So there's much discussion कि भाई diagnosis बढ़ गई है या कुछ माहौल की बात है। जेनेटिक्स तो पता है, लेकिन जेनेटिक्स और माहौल, environment, जो एपिजेनेटिक्स की बात है, उस पर बहुत रिसर्च हो रही है। और जो पेट की ग़िज़ा और बैक्टीरिया है, आई थिंक हमारे मुल्कों में बहुत जल्दी बहुत ज़्यादा एंटीबायोटिक्स दिए जाते हैं, बल्कि प्रिस्क्रिप्शन की भी नहीं ज़रूरत। तो उससे एक जो बैलेंस होता है, एक इम्बैलेंस देख रहे हैं, एंड उस पर बहुत रिसर्च हो रही है कि टॉक्सिन्स फ्रॉम द गट और एलर्जीज फ्रॉम द गट एक्चुअली कैन अफेक्ट द ब्रेन एंड बिहेवियर. So this is very exciting new approach, in a sense, a new paradigm, and I think we have to be cautious but also hopeful and go forward and do more research and collaborate with people. तो शुक्रिया कि आप यहाँ पर आए, और नहीं, ये ग्लोबल ये बात है, ये सिर्फ अमेरिका में नहीं, ये पाकिस्तान, सऊदी, दुबई वगैरह वगैरह, और ये मैं कोशिश कर रही हूँ कि ये ग्लोबल इनिशिएटिव से, चाहे हम यूनाइटेड नेशंस के थ्रू भी या अपने मुख्तलिफ इदारे, अपना डॉक्टर्स ऑल्सो गेटिंग इंटरेस्टेड इन डूइंग समथिंग। तो बस अल्लाह की तरफ से बात होती है कि सही लोग सही वक्त पे साथ आएँ तो काम होता है। मुझे बहुत
शुक्रिया डॉक्टर।
चलें, शुक्रिया।
Dear viewers, Dr. Hollander is with us. He did a lot of work on autism. Doc, how are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. You are talking to Pakistani community this time.
Okay.
And all over where our viewers are. So, what is happening in autism now? In a brief, say something.
Well, I think that there's a lot of new developments, but there's still a lot of way to go, really, in terms of dealing with autism. You know, I think we're starting to realize that it's a pretty complex disorder. There are multiple different causes. We're starting to identify more unique subgroups of the illness, and one of the things that I've been involved in is trying to match specific treatments for people with specific subtypes of the disorders.
And do you want to advise parents
how to stay away if they have, you know, small children and the baby bones. So what are the things they should look into to keep their kids away from autism?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of emphasis in terms of early screening. So to try to pick up individuals who have a lag in development, if their language is slow, or if they have lots of rigid compulsive behaviors, or if they have problems in terms of social communication. You know, one of the ideas is to identify the issues, get some early intervention, and speed up the long-term developmental trajectory. It is true that there are things in the environment that may not be good for the developing brain. And so, you know, there can be some toxins in the environment that may not be healthy. I think that a lot of the technologic developments are not particularly good. I think that many children get addicted to the internet.
I see.
They spend way too much time online rather than interacting with other individuals. I like to tell my children to get out of the house and go play in the dirt, interact with other children, have more physical kind of activities.
Right. Viewers, we have Dr. Derek McFabe. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
You are talking to I'm Kavish Shanway, it's a Pakistani TV channel, and you want to tell our viewers about autism, and what are the things they should look into to keep their kids away from, or if they already have autism, so what should they do, or what are the symptoms they see and they can tell that this could be autism?
Well, autism is a family of disorders, but characteristically what you see is a child that seems to develop normally at some point and either does not talk whatsoever, or even more peculiarly, what we've been very interested in, seems to start developing normal speech and social behavior like all children do, interacting with parents and family, and then peculiarly around the age of 18 months, the child loses this normal social development and language, and is incredibly heartbreaking for families, and reverts into these repetitive antisocial behaviors, often tragically with a lot of self-injury. It's not so much they're dangerous to other people, they're more dangerous to themselves in terms of the injurious behaviors. And also a lot of these children have very peculiar repetitive behaviors, rocking, limb flapping, touching objects over and over again. And then in addition, perhaps either no speech or saying words over and over like echo, it's called echoalia, like an echo. And what you find is other problems with these children that seem actually kind of peculiar. These behavioral changes, which are tragic, a lot of families that got me interested in reported that the children had these symptoms of all things associated with gastrointestinal problems with the gut. So children would be have constipation or interspersed with diarrhea, and even also more peculiarly cravings for certain kind of foods. You know, sweets, carbohydrates, naan in Eastern culture, things that have a lot of bread or sugars. And peculiarly, some of these children would want this food and get worse with their behaviors. And then empirically, like all good parenting, some people would try to take some of these foods away, and the children's behaviors, remarkably, some of them, not all of them, seem to improve, and also improved along the line of all things, these gastrointestinal symptoms. So what I started to wonder, my background is in neurology, so, you know, families were told that the regression or these symptoms associated with GI problems were kind of imaginary, and that this is a permanent untreatable disorder, largely genetic and environmental, and the major behavior is a kind of rehabilitation. And I got the idea that, you know, perhaps these gut problems and behaviors could be linked, that potentially something in the gut could be influencing brain development behavior. So what people may not realize is, you know, when you eat, we actually, research is showing that you have up to 100 times the bacteria in your gut that you have cells in your body. So we're 90% bacteria. So when these children eat, when all of us eat, we feed these bacteria, and they produce compounds, fermentation, like a cow, and these compounds, called short-chain fatty acids, can go through the bloodstream, And with our research, we found that they have very, very remarkable effects on brain function and behavior. So what was even more peculiar with these picture, you know, the best research and come with teams of experts. No one knows everything. But the microbiologists were finding, hey, a lot of these children had very strange populations of bacteria in their guts, and many of them had been exposed to antibiotics when they're young. Now, I caution, antibiotics are life-saving, but the potential, more so in the Western society, but as you know, countries including Pakistan are adopting, maybe not necessarily good, a lot of the Western diets and foods, there's potentials for the bacteria in the guts of us and children changing. So there's a lot of research showing changing bacteria are leading, particularly in the first 18 months of life, are leading to risks of a lot of diseases that we're seeing in the West: obesity, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and autism. But you know, tragically, are also being shown. You know, in places that I've been in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you're finding increases. In India, Pakistan, Middle Eastern regions are finding this, you know, very rapid increase in autism. The disease used to be 1 in 10,000. Then it was 1 in 180, and now it's up to 1 in 50 children are afflicted with this disorder. So genetics can't only account for that. There's something environmental that could be contributing to it. So what's very interesting is, you know, with the newer techniques in microbiology and neurology, people are understanding the bacterial populations in the gut that are contributing to a lot of disorders. And not all autism, but actually probably a large group. And what we found in our research is we initially wanted to do animal research. So we took the compounds that these little bacteria from autism guts produce, we gave them into laboratory animals, and lo and behold, the animals exhibited all the hyperactive and repetitive and antisocial behaviors that looked like in autism. And what was even more interesting, and that's the importance of doing good science, you have to do animal research at some point. When you examined which you can, the brain tissues of these animals, we found that they had very similar brain immune and fat changes that looked like autistic patients. So this becomes a tool dealing with patients that can't tell us what's going on, that we can extract information. Now here's a disease that was thought to be mostly, even when autism started, you know, tragically the parents were blamed that you were a bad parent. And this is completely false. So what people are finding now, a disease that is largely thought to be just solely genetics. Genetics has a large role, I don't want to minimize that, but solely genetics and just irreversible. People are doing, research is coming in from, of all places, microbiology, specialties in gastroenterology, immunology, metabolism. All these groups, this is tragic at one level because the disease is increasing, but at the same time it's forcing people to stand and say, we have to work together. Just like communities around the world, just like these bacteria are colonies and they can work together for good or badness, here you have multiple groups and expertise. And I would, as I mentioned before, we've had lots of interests in a lot of areas, including you know, Southeast Asia, showing these populations that are rapidly increasing. So the bottom line is, you know, what will be done in the future for these patients? Well, understanding, I wish things could be more rapid, but we have to do things rationally. The future may lie in understanding hygienic methods in early childhood development, and indeed some of the older ways of having children. It may be that in Western societies, over-hygiene paradoxically can antibiotic use has the potential, even though it's life-saving, used for a long time, contribute to the disorder. So now we're finding, you know, in my personal view, autism may be more similar to metabolic diseases like diabetes. I'm centered in Canada where insulin was discovered, and that's what intrigued me, where you had metabolic diseases like diabetes where children had good and bad days and whole body things. Autism may in fact be linked, of all things, to bacteria in the gut, potentially early in development more so, that are altering brain development and behavior in ways that don't need necessarily be permanent. And going back to some of the more archaic diets where civilization started in the Indus River, where you're from, as well as the Middle East, some of the areas where people are looking at agriculture and bacteria may hold keys in the future to understanding how to prevent this very, very serious disease. You know, you can't have a disease that's 1 in 10,000 and then be 1 in 50, and people can just shrug and say, well, and it's not acceptable, and none of us here feel this. It was a very good conference, and I was very delighted to be invited here.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCabe.
Okay, thank you.
Dear viewers, we have Dr. Sidney Baker, and he's with us in Beth Israel. Sir, how are you today?
Thank you very well.
You came here on the invitation of Dr. Asma Sadiq, and would you like to tell our community that the parents, especially, what should they keep in view that if they see any kind of symptoms relating to autism, so what should they do?
Well, they have to begin to think a little bit differently, perhaps, than whatever sort of Western medicine they have accumulated since colonial days.
I see.
Okay, I think traditional thinking is probably more effective in the spectrum where we find ourselves. We call it a spectrum because it has to do with a wide range of different kinds of problems that people have. And one thing that they could do is log on to the website that I have called Autism 360, which is an international, a global resource for parents. It's free. It's funded by the Moody's Foundation here in New York. But it is a service to parents who are looking for answers. That phrase, looking for answers, is a fairly loaded phrase. That is to say, when I was in medical school at Yale in 1962, I saw a film that was, we didn't see many movies in medical school, but there was a film helping us to learn how to be doctors. We were second-year students, and there was a very dignified pediatrician, a lovely man, with the parents sitting there of a child with developmental problems. And the message of the film from the doctor to us students was to tell the parents, don't look for answers. Which on reflection, I found shocking, because looking for answers is very important. So Autism 360 is a website where you can describe your children's problems and their strengths, which is very important to keep in mind. Our children have many strengths, and the strengths are what will nourish healing. I mean, healing is done by nature, right? And so we have to give nature the best deal in encouraging that process. And so you describe the various problems that your child has, but you have to put in at least one strength. And then you get to see a match of this pattern to other children who most closely resemble yours in our database, which is the database is based on a structure of medical information that happens to be something I invented, but it's a fairly sophisticated method for capturing details of medical experience in an n-dimensional hyperspace. But anyway, it casts, so to speak, a shadow through this pattern and shows a pattern where you belong and who are the closest people to you, and then it tells you what did they do that they found helpful. And this is not coming from above. This is not expert advice. This is coming from below, but it's what we all do when we have something wrong with us and we run into someone at a wedding or a funeral or a party, and they complain of something, and they say, well, I have that same thing. What did you do? But we have a way of doing that with statistical validity based on very large, we have the biggest database about autistic children in the world with these kinds of details. So that's one thing that people can do. But in terms of helping Mother Nature do healing, I think it is helpful to pose two questions. And then I'll give you two more.
Okay.
The first two begin with one that I learned in Nepal
I see.
in 1959,
59.
before I went to medical school. And I was there before I went. I took some time off to go around and see things in the Far East for a year. And I spent 3 months in Nepal, and I happened to run into an American doctor there.
Okay.
And he would say to me, after each patient we saw in little clinics around the valley of Kathmandu, he would say, "Sydney, have we done everything we can for this patient?" That's a different question than have we done everything we can for this disease.
Yeah.
So that's a really important question, and it's a difficult patient. It's a difficult question. It's what makes it very difficult living for parents who want to do the best for their child and they don't know when they've done enough. So then that's the hard question. There's an easy question, however, to ask for parents to ask, which is, what's the best step do we do next? What's the next thing to do? It's not, well, what are all the things we can do? Or what's the absolute truth? Or what's the answer? It says, okay, what do we do first? And if they keep that in mind, it makes life much easier. Most of the things that need to be done are a brief trial of doing something to make a change. Illness is a signal to change. So if you make a change and you see a benefit, then you know something is going on that's good. So the child becomes the best laboratory. The child is the expert. And the child tells you, this is looking good. In Pakistan, do we do thumbs up for good? Okay, I have to be careful with gestures in international culture. But, and so then you learn something from that. And so you can learn a lot without having an expert beyond the child. The child is the expert. You have to ask the child, is this going to work? If you stop eating casein milk, will that be good or not? It often is. It often is dramatically so. Or gluten, and found in wheat, and so on. So that's a good point, I think, for parents to understand. Then there are two other important questions. And one is, could this patient, from my perspective, have an unmet special need, which, if satisfied, would favor nature's strong impulse toward healing? Do you need to get something? If you got it, would you do better? Okay. And then there's another question. Could this person, this patient, could my child, have something for which he has an intolerance or an allergy or is not good for him, or a toxin, which, if avoided or gotten rid of, would favor nature's buoyant impulse toward healing? Nature does the healing, right? So when you ask those two questions, it turns the focus on the child, not the disease, because it's about the question. In the question is the word special. And people talk in the autism world about special needs children, but they don't really. They think special needs to have some different education or a different kind of teacher or different kinds of lessons. But from my perspective, from the standpoint of biochemistry and immunology, we have to remember, first of all, that the most fundamental principle of life is that every living creature is an individual. It's a law of nature, and it's a law with serious spiritual and biological significance. So that if every child is an individual, then the business about treating the disease takes you off track. Instead, you have to focus on the individual. And if you keep those two questions in mind and you start thinking about it that way, many times parents will come up with their own idea. Never mind my ideas. Obviously, I have a few. But the parents will come up with their own idea and say, well, you know, I wondered if maybe there's something he's eating that doesn't agree with him because his poops are bad and so on. And then, like, where can we take that? Maybe we could experiment with the diet. So those are the kinds of thoughts. So the world in which I live is one in which there's a collaborative relationship between the patient and the doctor. It's not that the doctor is the authority. The child is the authority, the expert. We have to learn to ask the right questions and have a loving approach toward finding the path based on these simple questions.
Very good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a nice day. Dear viewers, we have one of the mothers who has a son. How old is your son?
My son Dylan is 8 years old.
Okay. And what's your name, by the way?
My name is Dara Berger.
Okay, Miss Berger. And how are you dealing with your son and how he's, I mean, what are you looking at for your son that in the coming days is your help as a mother in the treatment and his behavior is coming up? How you expecting some good results from the treatment?
Yes, well, he was diagnosed at 2 years old, which was 6 years ago, and he's come a long way. We've done a lot of different things for him, therapeutically and nutritionally, and he's light years from where he once was. He's still a work in progress. We've done certain diets, we've done all kinds of treatments that have helped him immensely. His biggest problem still is speech, which is getting better. He just still has a little ways to go.
I see, I see. And this Dr. Asma is helping you're treating?
No, actually, Doug, we work together here. I volunteer for the NAA New York Metro chapter. I do a ton of volunteer work where I plan events like this conference. And Dr. Siddiq and I have been working closely together for 3 years. We plan monthly educational events here at the hospital for families with special needs.
So it's where the kids especially needs some kind of treatment or...
Yeah, well, the information is very helpful for parents because we come here, we learn about new treatments, new diets, and then we're able to go home and talk to our own doctor or nutritionist and then implement some of the things we learn about.
Is state or city helping out financially and treating?
New York City is very good in some regards at trying to give you services. As your child gets older, it gets much tougher and the services get less scarce. But overall, New York City is very good compared to a lot of other places.
Thank you so much for your
time.
Dear viewers, we have Dr. Klein and she's a pediatric neurologist. Hi Doc, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thank you.
I met with her at the conference for autism and so what are you looking into these days to help the kids neurological point of view, please?
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time working on botanical therapy, so using medicinal herbs to help these kids with the various issues they have in their digestion, in their immune systems, and in their brains.
I see. And how is the response? The medicines are working?
I've had a very good response because a lot of these kids are put on pharmaceutical medications and they don't really deal with the underlying problems. So what I'm trying to do with the botanicals is to help heal the underlying issues so that they function better.
I see. Do you know if we are looking into the trying to find the reasons why autism is happening?
I think there are a lot of different stressors that impact kids. I think a lot of these kids have genetic vulnerability, and then they have an array of different environmental exposures, and it can be various kinds of toxins, it can be various kinds of stressors, and immunizations can be one in some kids which can trigger, can be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
I see. I see. So what is your advice to the parents if they see something that they doubt that this could be autism? So what should they do? They suddenly they try to contact any doctor in development.
Yeah, if they're worried about autism, then it's good to get some medical attention. And the earlier you do interventions, the more likely you are to be successful in helping.
Oh, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We have Dr. Richard Fry with us at the conference. Doc, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Fine, fine. I was watching everything you were trying to explain during the conference. But
a very exciting treatment. There's something called cerebral folate deficiency. Some children that had regression very early on, usually before the age of 1, decreased head circumference with lots of neurological symptoms, and he did LPs on them, as we do as neurologists, and what he found is that they had low values of folates in their central nervous system.
About the milk, if kids have autism, so which
Yeah,
milk?
it's very interesting. What we find is in certain children with autism, that milk causes an increase in this autoantibody, an antibody that can bind to a certain protein that's important for taking folate from the blood and bringing it into the nervous system. And if they go on a milk-free diet, it decreases that antibody, so folate can get into the nervous system much better, and we see many people and children improve.
I see.
Find a way.